Families of Israeli captives being held in Gaza are marking 2 years of war by holding rallies and memorials in Tel Aviv. They're urging their government to accept the ceasefire deal with Hamas and help release their relatives. They've criticised Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's handling of the war. He's facing pressure from some right-wing members of his cabinet not to end the war. The fate of the Israeli captives has become one of the most divisive issues in Israel, sparking mass protests since the war began. Here's where things stand. On October the 7th, Hamas and its allied fighters captured 251 Israelis and foreign nationals during their attack. Since then, 203 captives have been returned to Israel, some through negotiated exchanges, a few others in military rescue operations. An estimated 48 captives remain in Gaza now. Israeli officials believe only 20 are still alive, though. Daniel Levy is president of the US Middle East Project and a former Israeli negotiator under Prime Ministers Ehud Barak and Yitzhak Rabin. He joins us now from London. Good to have you with us, Daniel. So how are Israelis reflecting on 2 years of war? Must be particularly painful for families of captives, right?
Well, absolutely. And of course, if one thinks of the impact this had on Israelis, most of my friends there spent the days after October 7th attending funerals. One can never ignore that October 7th came after decades of occupation, of apartheid, of structural violence used against Palestinians. But that doesn't also empty that day and the crimes committed on that day of its meaning. And I think today Israelis are perhaps still in denial about what has been done by their state, by themselves, in their name, in Gaza over this 2 years. The Israeli leadership told us on that day already that Palestinians will be collectively punished, that no distinction will be drawn between civilians and combatants. 2 years in, not only has one had the absolute annihilation, obliteration of Gaza, the mass killing, the genocidal killing, the permanent and multiple times of displacement, the starvation, but, and this is where I think the fault line in Israel exists, sadly it's not really about how Palestinians have been treated, but the fault line in Israel centers around, and the government has deprioritized returning those Israelis. And so it is a society that on the one hand has been mobilized and has entered some kind of genocidal doom loop, on the other hand is fragmented, doesn't support the deprioritization of getting a ceasefire to get the Israelis released. Netanyahu has done many other things. He's pumped money into the economy, giving huge compensation to those who've agreed to be reservists on almost a semi-permanent basis. So he's kept that kind of thing afloat. And of course has tried to avoid isolation, which he's talking more and more about, because if there is real pressure on Israel, that might be the thing that tips the balance in public opinion.
Daniel, you probably heard just a short while ago the US president being asked in the Oval Office about guarantees, that what guarantees he can give that once captives are released, Israel and Netanyahu will not renege, as has happened, and restart the war. And his answer was, we'll do everything possible. Is that going to cut it this time? And what will that translate in terms of the actual, shall we say, communication from the US to Netanyahu?
Well, one has seen in the past that a deal was entered into and violated by Israel, by Netanyahu. And he told us in the past that that was his intention, and he went ahead and did it, and there was no cost or consequence. So I think, trust me, is not going to be enough this time around, especially since you've seen the Israeli Prime Minister come out of his meeting with the American president with the plan on the table and already contradict what is written in that plan. And let's be clear, this is a plan that has Israel's fingerprints all over it. And yet it still wasn't enough for Netanyahu. He still said, we're going to stay in the majority of Gaza and we're never going to allow a Palestinian state. So I think one of the things going on in these talks right now is the need for clarity. that there is actually a plausible pathway from here to ending the genocide, not resuming the attacks, for the Israeli military to be out of Gaza, not withdraw to a line that leaves most of Gaza under its control and therefore Palestinians unable to return to their homes in most of Gaza, that genuinely allows the ramping up to scale of desperately needed humanitarian provision inside Gaza. For instance, will Israel withdraw from the Egypt-Gaza border, making that a crossing that things can come in via? And then, of course, there are the details of when Israelis will be released, which Palestinians held in Israeli prisons, often in detention without trial for extremely lengthy periods of time as well, which of those will be released. Without those details, I think this remains stuck, and that's what's being worked on right now.
All right, thank you so much for your analysis. Daniel Levy there, president of the US Middle East Project.
Don't miss out the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news and expert insights. Like, share, stay ahead.